A single shot echoes through the night. Then another, and another. Smoke rises in the moonlight. Somewhere in the darkness, a man falls. To understand how it came to this, we need to go back. Back to the moment it all started. They had her homestead surrounded. Martha Blackwood watched as the flames consumed everything she had built over 15 years. Her cabin, the barn, the small vegetable patch where she'd grown her own food, all of it going up in smoke. "Stay back, widow," one of Silas Crane's men called out. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "You don't want to get hurt." Martha didn't move. She just stood there in her nightdress, barefoot in the cold dirt. Her hair was tied back, but strands had fallen loose, sticking to her face with sweat and tears. She could feel the heat on her skin, even from 20 feet away. "Where is it?" another man demanded. He was searching through the ashes with his boot. "The deed should be in the safe." "Must have burned with everything else," the first man said. "Good riddance to that old paper." Silas Crane stood apart from the others, watching the fire with satisfaction. He was a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and eyes that never seemed to blink. He wore a fine wool coat despite the night's chill, and his boots were polished clean. "Make sure nothing's left standing," Crane ordered. "I don't want any trace of her claim when the sun comes up." Martha clenched her fists. She had fought these men before, fought them in court, fought them with petitions, fought them with letters to the territorial governor. Nothing had worked. Silas Crane always had friends in high places, friends like Sheriff Tom Weston, who never seemed to be around when crimes were committed. The men moved through the wreckage, kicking at beams, scattering ashes. One of them picked up a charred photograph from the ground. "Look what I found," he said, holding it up. It showed Martha with her late husband, standing in front of the cabin when it was new. "Throw it in the fire," Crane said without looking. The man tossed the photo onto the flames. It curled and blackened in seconds. "That's all you are now, widow," Crane said, finally turning his attention to her. "Ashes and memories, and soon enough, even those will be gone." Martha said nothing. She just watched as her life's work turned to smoke and dust. Then she heard it, a horse approaching, not fast, not panicked, steady, deliberate. The men stopped what they were doing. Crane turned, frowning. From the darkness between the trees, a figure emerged, a man on a brown horse. He wore a tan cowboy hat and a bright red bandana around his neck. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were clear. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He just looked. The stranger stopped about 50 feet from the fire. He didn't dismount. He didn't speak. He just watched. Crane squinted, trying to see who this stranger was. "Who are you?" he called out. The man didn't answer. He just sat there on his horse, watching the flames consume Martha's home. Crane's men shifted nervously. They didn't know what to make of this silent observer. The stranger reached down to his side. His hand rested on the butt of a holstered pistol, not threatening, just present. Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. Crane didn't like being watched. "You got business here?" he demanded, taking a step forward. The stranger finally spoke. His voice was calm, even. "She has a deed," he said, "and you don't." The men laughed. But Crane didn't. He just stared at the stranger, his jaw tightening. The stranger dismounted slowly. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud in the dirt. "Whatever paper you think she had," Crane said. "It's gone now, burned with everything else." The stranger shook his head. "No," he said, "it's not." And with that, he started walking toward the fire, toward Martha, toward Silas Crane and his men. The night was about to get a whole lot longer. The stranger walked toward the fire, his boots crunching on the charred remains of what had been Martha's home. Silas Crane and his men tensed, hands drifting toward their weapons. "Whatever paper you think she had," Crane repeated, his voice tight. "It's gone now, burned with everything else." The stranger stopped a few feet from the flames, heat radiating against his face. "The deed to this land," he said, his eyes fixed on Crane. "It's not burned. It's in your pocket." One of Crane's men laughed nervously. "You're crazy, stranger. Nobody's got any deed." Crane's hand instinctively went to his coat pocket. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The stranger turned to Martha. "Is that right, widow?" he asked. "You have a deed for this land?" Martha nodded, tears streaming down her face. "My husband and I bought it 15 years ago, paid for it with everything we had. The paper's been in that safe since day one." Crane sneered. "That old piece of paper? It's worthless now. The land belongs to me." The stranger took another step forward. "Why would you want her land so bad, Crane? What's on it that's worth burning a woman out of her home?" "It's strategic," Crane said, though he was clearly uncomfortable. "The creek runs through her property, controls water access for my cattle." The stranger shook his head. "That's not it. The deed you're hiding has something else on it. Something valuable." Martha's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "The mineral rights," the stranger said. "Your deed specifies that the land includes silver deposits. That's why Crane wants it so bad, why he's been trying to run you off for years." Crane's face went pale. "That's a lie. There's no silver on that land." The stranger ignored him. "Your husband knew when he bought it. That's why it was such a bargain. He paid for the surface rights, but the silver belongs to whoever holds the deed." Martha looked from the stranger to Crane, understanding dawning on her face. "All these years, all the trouble you've caused, because of silver?" "Enough of this," Crane snapped, drawing his pistol. "You two can talk fantasies while I finish the job." The stranger didn't flinch. He moved with impossible speed, drawing his own weapon and firing before Crane could aim. The shot rang out in the night, and Crane's pistol clattered to the ground. The other men froze, hands in the air. The stranger holstered his weapon. "The deed, Crane. Now." One of Silas's men slowly reached into Crane's coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He handed it to the stranger. The stranger turned to Martha. "Your land is yours, widow. All of it. Surface and mineral rights." Martha took the deed, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. The stranger nodded. "Don't thank me yet. Crane won't give up this easily. And the silver on your land, that's going to make you a target." He looked toward the dark horizon. "You have 3 days to decide what you'll do with what you've got, because once word gets out about that silver, everyone will come calling." Martha clutched the deed to her chest, looking at the ruins of her home, then at the stranger who had just saved her only proof of ownership. The stranger turned back to Silas and his men. "I'll be watching, and if I see so much as a spark of smoke on this property again, there won't be enough of you left to bury." With that, he turned and walked back to his horse, leaving Martha alone with the ashes of her past and the promise of her future. The stranger watched as Martha clutched the deed to her chest, her face illuminated by the dying embers of her former home. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. She had fought Silas Crane for years, and now, with everything she owned reduced to ash, he could see the fight draining from her. Martha looked up at the stranger, her expression blank. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger didn't answer immediately. He scanned the horizon, checking for any sign of Silas's men returning. When he was satisfied they were gone, he turned back to Martha. "You rebuild," he said simply, "on your own terms." Martha shook her head slowly. "I have nothing left, no tools, no supplies, no money." The stranger reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch. He tossed it to Martha. She caught it clumsily, opening it to reveal several gold coins. "Enough for tools and supplies," he said. "For now." Martha stared at the coins, then back at the stranger. "Why are you doing this?" The stranger didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked the question he'd come to ask. "Where did you last see it?" Martha frowned. "See what?" "The deed," the stranger said, "before the fire." "Where did you last have it?" Martha thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It was in the safe, always in the safe. My husband installed it when we first bought the place. Said it was fireproof." The stranger nodded slowly. "Was it locked?" "Yes," Martha said. "Always locked. The combination was my husband's birthday." The stranger circled the charred remains of the cabin, his eyes scanning the debris. If it was fireproof, why would Silas's men be looking for it? Martha looked confused. "I don't know. They kept asking about it during the fire. Said it was gone." The stranger stopped and turned back to Martha. "It wasn't in the safe. Or if it was, Silas has it now." Martha's face fell. "But you had it. You gave it back to me." The stranger shook his head. "That was a copy or a forgery. The real deed has something Silas wants, something that would make your land worthless to him if it came to light." Martha looked from the stranger to the ruins of her home, understanding dawning on her face. "The silver rights," she whispered. "That's what he's after." The stranger nodded. "And he'll stop at nothing to get them, including burning you out again." Martha clutched the deed tighter. "What do I do?" The stranger looked toward the town in the distance. "You come with me, for now, until we can figure out what to do next." Martha hesitated, looking at the ashes that had been her home for 15 years. "I can't just leave everything." "Everything is already gone, widow," the stranger said gently. "What you have now is a chance to start over, but not here, not until Silas is dealt with." Martha looked at the stranger, then at the gold coins in her hand, then back at the stranger. "Where would we go?" The stranger turned his horse. "Doc Elmer's place. He'll help you, and he knows more about Silas than anyone in this town." Martha nodded slowly. gathering what few personal belongings she had left. A few charred photos, a cooking pot, and the deed. She mounted the stranger's horse behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist as they rode away from the ashes of her former life. The stranger didn't look back. He knew Silas would be watching, and he knew the real fight was just beginning. The stranger guided Martha through the darkness, the brown horse moving steadily toward the distant lights of town. Martha clung to his waist, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She hadn't slept since the fire, and the adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving her cold and hollow. They rode in silence for miles, the only sounds the horse's hooves striking dirt and the occasional cry of a night bird. Martha stared at the passing landscape, her mind replaying the images of her home burning to the ground. 15 years of her life reduced to ash and memories. Doc Elmer's place is just ahead, the stranger said quietly, breaking the silence. He'll take you in, keep you safe for now. Martha nodded, unable to speak. She was too tired to form words, too overwhelmed to process what was happening. The horse slowed as they approached a small cabin on the edge of town. A light burned in one window, casting a warm glow against the night. The stranger helped Martha dismount, his hand firm but gentle on her arm. "Doc's a good man," he said. "He'll help you." Martha looked up at him, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. "What about you?" The stranger didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "I need to do some digging, find out what really happened to your deed." He turned to leave, but Martha caught his arm. "Wait, what if Silas comes after me? What if he burns this place down too?" The stranger looked back at the cabin, then at Martha. "Doc Elmer knows how to protect himself, and he knows Silas better than anyone." Before Martha could respond, the stranger was already walking away, disappearing into the shadows. She stood there for a moment, watching him go, then turned and knocked on the cabin door. The door opened almost immediately, revealing an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Martha, what happened to you? Your place is burning up half the sky." "Silas Crane happened," Martha said, her voice cracking. "He burned my cabin to the ground." Doc Elmer's eyes widened with recognition. "Silas? What did he want?" "The deed," Martha said. "They kept asking about the deed." Doc Elmer's expression hardened. "Come inside, Martha. We'll talk about this." Martha stepped into the small cabin, grateful for the warmth and the smell of herbs and medicine that filled the air. Doc Elmer closed the door behind her, his face serious. "This is about the silver rights, isn't it?" he asked. Martha nodded. "The stranger said my husband knew about the silver when we bought the land. That's why Silas has been trying to run me off." Doc Elmer sighed heavily. "I've been trying to warn people about Silas for years, but nobody listens, not even the sheriff." "The stranger said you know more about Silas than anyone," Martha said. "What do you know?" Doc Elmer hesitated, looking around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I have records, documents, things I've collected over the years, proof of Silas's activities." "What kind of activities?" Martha pressed. "The kind that would put him in prison for the rest of his life," Doc Elmer said quietly, "if anyone had the courage to bring them to light." Meanwhile, the stranger had ridden back toward town, his mind focused on one thing: finding Martha's deed. He knew Silas wouldn't destroy it. Not something that valuable. He would hide it, use it, maybe even forge a new one. The stranger dismounted outside the saloon, tying his horse to the hitching post. He pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the smell of whiskey and stale tobacco hitting him like a physical blow. The room fell silent as eyes turned toward him. The stranger scanned the room, taking in the faces, the postures, the weapons. He saw Silas's men sitting at a table in the corner, laughing and drinking. He saw the sheriff at the bar, nursing a drink and pretending not to notice anything unusual. The stranger walked up to the bar, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender. The man poured a drink without looking at him. "That'll be 50 cents. The stranger slid a coin across the counter. "I'm looking for information," he said, as he took a sip. "About a deed. Silas Crane was involved." The bartender wiped the counter nervously. "Don't know nothing about any deed." The stranger nodded slowly. "Of course you don't." He took another sip, his eyes scanning the room again. "Anyone in town might know where Silas keeps his important papers." The bartender shook his head. "Silas is a private man, keeps his business to himself." The stranger finished his drink and set the glass down with a soft click. "Too bad. I was hoping to avoid trouble." He turned and walked toward the door, but as he passed Silas's table, one of the men stood up. "You got a problem, stranger?" The stranger stopped and turned. "No problem at all. Just looking for something that belongs to someone else." The man laughed. "Everything in this town belongs to Silas eventually." The stranger met his gaze. "Not everything." He walked out of the saloon, leaving the men behind. Outside, he untied his horse and mounted up, scanning the street. He needed to find someone who knew Silas's routines, someone who might have seen something unusual. His eyes fell on a woman sweeping the boardwalk outside the general store. She looked familiar. Martha had mentioned her once. "That's Sarah," she'd said. "She works at the store. Knows everything about everyone." The stranger rode over and dismounted again. "Excuse me, ma'am." The woman looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about Silas Crane," the stranger said, "specifically about his habits, where he goes, what he does." Sarah glanced nervously toward the saloon. "Why do you want to know about Silas?" "I need to find something he's keeping," the stranger said. "Something that doesn't belong to him." Sarah hesitated, her broom still in her hand. "Silas keeps a safe in his office at the ranch. That's where he keeps all his important papers." The stranger nodded. "What's the combination? Or who knows it?" "His foreman, Jeb," Sarah said. "He's the only one besides Silas who knows the combination." "And where would I find Jeb?" "Usually at the saloon," Sarah said, "or at the ranch. Depends on the day." The stranger thanked her and remounted his horse. He had a lead now. Silas's ranch. The safe. Jeb. It was something to work with. He rode toward the edge of town, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the ranch house. He knew Silas would have men watching, but he also knew that Silas wouldn't expect anyone to come looking for the deed. Not after what happened to Martha's place. The stranger found the ranch an hour later, a large house without buildings and corrals full of cattle. He dismounted and tied his horse behind a line of trees, then approached the house cautiously. From his vantage point, he could see the office window. Light burned inside. Someone was there. Probably Jeb, getting ready for the next day's work. The stranger moved closer, staying in the shadows. He watched as a man came out of the office, locking the door behind him. Jeb. He was larger than the stranger had expected, with broad shoulders and a thick beard. Jeb walked toward the main house, leaving the office door locked. The stranger waited until he was gone, then moved quickly to the window. Peering inside, he could see a large safe in the corner of the room. It was old, but solid, exactly what he'd expect Silas to use. The stranger circled the building, looking for another way in. He found a small window on the side, partially covered by curtains. It was locked, but old. A few minutes of work with a knife, and it yielded. He slipped inside, moving silently through the dark room. The safe stood before him, large and imposing. He knelt and examined the lock. It was a combination, not a key. Exactly as Sarah had said. The stranger closed his eyes, picturing what Jeb might have used. Birthdays, anniversaries, simple numbers. He tried 1, 2, 3, nothing. 4, 5, 6, nothing. 7, 8, 9, nothing. He stood up, frustrated. He needed more information, something that would give him the combination. As he turned to leave, his foot caught on something. Looking down, he saw a ledger on the floor. He picked it up and opened it. Inside were columns of numbers and names, land transactions, dates, prices. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the entries. Most were legitimate sales, but some had asterisks next to them. And those entries all had something in common. They were properties that Silas had acquired under questionable circumstances. The stranger continued flipping, his heart pounding. He was looking for Martha's name, for her property. He found it on page 12. The entry showed the sale of her land to Silas Crane, but the date was wrong. The price was wrong, and the signature was clearly not hers. This was the proof he needed, the documentation that would expose Silas's scheme, but he still needed the original deed, the one Silas was using to claim the mineral rights. He carefully replaced the ledger and slipped back out the window, melting into the night. He had what he needed to expose Silas, but not what he needed to restore Martha's rights completely. The stranger mounted his horse and rode back towards town, his mind racing. He had a plan now, a way to bring Silas down. But first, he needed to find Doc Elmer, and he needed to convince the old man to help him. The night was far from over, and the stranger knew Silas would be watching, waiting, planning his next move. The stranger rode through the darkness, his mind racing with the information he'd gathered at Silas's ranch. He had proof now, evidence that would expose Silas's scheme to steal Martha's land, but he needed Doc Elmer's help to make it stick. As he approached the edge of town, a shadow moved in the darkness ahead. 3 figures stepped out from between the buildings, blocking his path. The stranger pulled up short, his hand instinctively going to his pistol. "Well, well," a voice said from the shadows. "Look what we have here." The stranger recognized the voice. Jeb, Silas's foreman. 2 other men stood with him, their faces obscured by the darkness. "The doc's place is this way," the stranger said. keeping his voice even. Jeb laughed. Doc Elmer won't be helping anyone tonight, not with a bullet in his head. The stranger's hand tightened on his pistol. What are you talking about? Silas knows you've been asking questions, Jeb said, taking a step forward. He knows you were at the ranch. He knows you found that ledger. The stranger didn't move. How could he know that? I was careful. Doesn't matter, Jeb said. What matters is that Silas wants you gone. Permanently. The other men moved to flank him, their hands resting on their weapons. The stranger knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, but he wasn't ready to die tonight. I'm just passing through, the stranger said, slowly backing his horse away. Not anymore, Jeb said. Draw. The stranger hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he moved, not to draw, but to turn his horse and bolt. He kicked the horse hard, and it surged forward, knocking into one of the men. Gunfire erupted behind him as he galloped away. A searing pain shot through his shoulder as a bullet grazed him. He cried out, but didn't slow down. The horse carried him through the dark streets of town, the sound of pursuit fading behind him. He didn't stop until he reached Doc Elmer's cabin. He dismounted quickly, stumbling as his injured shoulder gave way. He knocked on the door, wincing at the pain. The door opened a crack. "Who's there?" Doc Elmer's voice called out. "It's me," the stranger said. "Open up. They're coming." Doc Elmer hesitated, then opened the door wider. "What happened to you?" "Silas knows," the stranger said, stepping inside. "He sent Jeb and his men. They tried to stop me." Doc Elmer helped him over to a chair, examining the wound. "This needs attention. But first, we need to talk." The stranger nodded, his face grim. "They found out about the ledger, about what I discovered." Doc Elmer's eyes widened. "You went to the ranch?" "I had to," the stranger said. "I needed proof that Silas was forging documents, stealing land. And you found it?" The stranger nodded. "Martha's land is in that ledger. The sale is forged. The signature isn't hers." Doc Elmer sighed heavily. "This changes everything. If Silas knows you're onto him, he'll move faster, more violently." The stranger touched his wound, wincing. "He already tried to kill me. That's how personal this is now." Doc Elmer rummaged through his medical supplies, returning with bandages and a bottle of whiskey. "This is going to hurt." The stranger gritted his teeth as Doc cleaned the wound. "It's not just about Martha anymore," he said through clenched teeth. "Silas tried to kill me. That makes this personal." Doc Elmer finished bandaging him. "You need to rest, but you also need a plan. Silas won't stop now." The stranger stood up, testing his shoulder. "I have a plan, and I'm going to see it through, no matter what." He walked to the door, stopping before stepping back out into the night. "What are you going to do?" Doc Elmer asked. The stranger turned, his face determined in the dim light. "I'm going to finish what I started, and Silas is going to pay for what he's done." He stepped out into the darkness, leaving Doc Elmer alone with his thoughts and the sound of approaching footsteps. The stranger had a score to settle now, and he wasn't going to rest until it was done. The stranger stepped out into the darkness, the night air cool against his wounded shoulder. He moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of Silas's men. The pain from his wound was a constant reminder of how personal this had become. He didn't head back toward his horse immediately. Instead, He circled around the cabin, checking the perimeter. When he was satisfied there was no immediate threat, he approached the front door again and knocked softly. Doc Elmer opened the door, his face etched with concern. "You shouldn't be out there," he whispered. "They could be watching." "I know," the stranger said, "but I need to ask you something important." Doc Elmer hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "What is it?" "You're hurt." "I'll be fine," the stranger said. "But I need to know about you, Doc. About Silas. What do you really know?" Doc Elmer's expression hardened. "I told you. I've seen what he's capable of." "I need more than that," the stranger said. "I need proof. Real proof that can stand up in court." Doc Elmer shook his head. "You don't understand. Silas has friends in high places, friends who would ignore any evidence you brought them." The stranger leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I found something at his ranch, a ledger. It shows forged documents, including Martha's land." Doc Elmer's eyes widened slightly. "You shouldn't have gone there. That was dangerous." "I know," the stranger said, "but I need to know if you have more, something that connects all the dots." Doc Elmer looked around nervously, then walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a medical text. He opened it to a page in the middle and slid a thin folder out from between the pages. "I've been collecting these for years," he said quietly. "Every forged document, every threat, every bribe." The stranger took the folder, his fingers tracing its edges. "Why haven't you done anything with this?" "Who would I take it to?" Doc Elmer asked, his voice trembling slightly. "The sheriff? He's on Silas's payroll. The judge? Same story. The territorial governor? Too far away. Too disconnected." The stranger nodded slowly. "So, you've been sitting on this all these years while Silas took what he wanted." "I was scared," Doc Elmer admitted. "I have a family, a practice. People depend on me." The stranger closed the folder and handed it back. "I understand, but things are different now. Silas tried to kill me tonight. That means he sees me as a threat, and threats don't just go away." Doc Elmer took the folder, clutching it to his chest. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we use this," the stranger said, "before Silas comes after you, before he comes after Martha again." "And how do we do that?" Doc Elmer asked. "Silas controls this town. He controls the law." "We do it publicly," the stranger said, "in front of everyone, where Silas can't hide, where his friends can't protect him." Doc Elmer looked at the folder in his hands, then at the stranger's determined face. "I don't know if I can do this." "You have to," the stranger said, "for Martha, for everyone Silas has hurt, for everyone he'll hurt if we don't stop him now." The old doctor looked at the folder, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said, "but we need a plan, something that can't fail." The stranger smiled slightly. "I've been thinking about that. Tomorrow morning, Town Square, when everyone's there for market day." Doc Elmer frowned. "That's risky. Too many witnesses." "Exactly," the stranger said. "Too many witnesses for Silas to do anything about it. Too many people who will see the truth." The stranger stood up, testing his shoulder. "Get some rest, Doc. We'll need all our strength tomorrow." He walked to the door, then turned back. "And, Doc, one more thing." "What's that?" "The real deed, Martha's original deed. Where is it? Doc Elmer looked confused. I thought it burned with her cabin. The stranger shook his head. Silas has it, hidden somewhere. That's what he's really after, not just the land, the mineral rights. Doc Elmer's eyes widened. The silver rights. Of course, that explains everything. The stranger nodded. Tomorrow. We'll get it all back. All of it. He stepped out into the night, leaving Doc Elmer alone with his thoughts and the folder that could change everything in the town. The stranger had a plan now, a way to bring Silas down. But first, he needed to get through the night, and he knew Silas would be watching, waiting, planning his next move. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square as people bustled about their business. The stranger stood at the edge of the crowd, his red bandana bright against his dark clothing. Doc Elmer stood beside him, clutching the folder of evidence like it was a shield. Silas Crane stood in the center of the square, addressing the townspeople. His voice carried across the space, smooth and confident. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to make an announcement about the widow Blackwood's property. The stranger stepped forward. She has a name, Crane. Martha, and you don't get to talk about her property anymore. Silas turned, his face hardening at the sight of the stranger. I should have known you'd show your face. Thought you'd learned your lesson after last night. Last night was just the beginning, the stranger said, his voice calm but firm. I have something you need to see. Doc Elmer moved to stand beside the stranger, opening the folder. This contains evidence of every forged document, every threat, every bribe you've made over the years. Silas's men began to move closer, their hands resting on their weapons. The townspeople watched nervously, sensing that something important was about to happen. What are you trying to prove? Silas demanded, though his confidence seemed to be wavering. The truth, the stranger said, about Martha's land, about the silver rights you've been trying to steal. Silas's eyes widened slightly. You know nothing about silver. I know enough, the stranger said. I found the ledger at your ranch, the one with all the forged sales, including Martha's. A murmur spread through the crowd. People began to whisper, their eyes shifting from Silas to the stranger and back again. You're lying, Silas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? The stranger asked. He pulled out a document from the folder. This is Martha's original deed, the one you thought was destroyed in the fire. Silas's face went pale. Where did you get that? The same place you keep all your important papers, the stranger said. In your safe. I had a little chat with your foreman, Jeb. Silas's men drew their weapons, creating tension in the square. The crowd gasped and stepped back, creating a clearing around the confrontation. You're making a mistake, Silas said, though his voice trembled slightly. The sheriff will arrest you for breaking and entering. The sheriff won't do anything, Doc Elmer said, stepping forward, because he's on your payroll, just like the judge, just like half the officials in this territory. Silas's men moved closer, their weapons drawn. The stranger didn't flinch. He reached slowly for his own pistol. This doesn't have to end badly, Silas said, though his eyes darted nervously toward his men. It already has, the stranger said, for Martha, for everyone you've hurt, for everyone you've threatened. The men tightened their grips on their weapons. The crowd held its breath. The tension in the square was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a voice called out, "Sheriff, over here!" All eyes turned as Sheriff Tom Weston pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his pistol. "What's going on here? Silas, what's this about?" The stranger knew this was it, the moment of truth, the moment when everything would change, and he was ready. All eyes turned as Sheriff Tom Weston pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his pistol. "What's going on here? Silas, what's this about?" The stranger took a step forward, never taking his eyes off Silas. "This is about justice, Sheriff, about a woman who lost everything while a powerful man took what wasn't his." Silas's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is nonsense. The widow abandoned her property. It's unclaimed land now." "Is that so?" the stranger asked, pulling a folded document from inside his vest. He held it up for everyone to see. "Then why does Silas Crane have Martha Blackwood's original deed hidden in his safe?" A gasp rippled through the crowd. People began to murmur, their eyes shifting between Silas and the stranger. "That's a forgery!" Silas shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Doc Elmer stepped forward, opening his folder. "I have records of every forged document Silas has used over the years, including Martha's sale." The stranger handed the deed to Martha. "This is yours, all of it, surface and mineral rights." Martha took the document, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Silas's men began to back away, sensing that their leader was cornered. "This is an outrage," Silas shouted. "I'll have you all arrested." "Will you, Silas?" the stranger asked, stepping closer. "Or will you admit what you've done? Admit you burned Martha's cabin to steal her land? Admit you've been forging documents for years?" Silas's face was a mask of panic now. "You can't prove anything." The stranger nodded to Doc Elmer. "Actually, we can. Every forged sale, every threat, every bribe. It's all here in black and white." Sheriff Weston looked from the documents to Silas, then to the crowd. I think we need to take this to the office," he said, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "You'll do more than that, Sheriff," the stranger said. "You'll arrest Silas Crane for fraud, arson, and conspiracy." Weston hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll place him under arrest." As Weston moved to handcuff Silas, the stranger turned to Martha. "Your land is yours, Martha, all of it. No one can take it from you now." Martha clutched the deed to her chest, looking at the ruins of her cabin that still stood in the distance. "What do I do now?" "You rebuild," the stranger said simply, "on your own terms, with what's rightfully yours." He turned to leave, but Martha caught his arm. "Wait, please, what's your name?" The stranger just smiled slightly, his red bandana bright against his dark clothing. "Names aren't important. What matters is that justice was served." He mounted his horse and rode out of town, not looking back. Martha watched him go, then turned to face her future with the deed clutched tightly in her hand. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.